Hello. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. I'm in. How are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you
Doing
doing?
great. I'm really excited about webs of trust. Um, and my first beef is that they're called usually web of trust versus webs of trust. And it's
Huh.
such an important differentiation. So I first got introduced to webs of trusts by Marty Malmy, who was the first contributor to Satoshi on Bitcoin. And it blew me away as this generalizable algorithm that can effectively be applied to nearly everything, not just like exchanging PGP keys.
Mhm.
So that's going to be like my opening excitement statement about webs of trusts. But I'll let you kind of guide or kick off any particular um, direction in it because I don't know how much
Well,
you may know about web of trusts or not.
it sounds like you are very excited to get out of the gate, and it sounds like you've already taken care of the opening statement. So, yeah, this is going to be a discussion about webs of trust from me, who doesn't understand anything about webs of trust, to you, who is, as asserted before, someone who is very excited about it. So you've given a little bit of an opening statement about how excited you are about it, but back it up. Tell me a little bit about the high level concepts of what you think of when you think of webs of trust.
Yes, the background to this is that whenever you connect to a server, whether it be Facebook or Google or whatnot, and you're connecting via HTTPS, you are typically doing that security layer by using a public key that has been sent to you from what's called a CA certificate authority. And
Right.
those certificate authorities are pretty much pre-baked into your computer, into the operating system itself. In the case of um, only Firefox, I think only Firefox ships its own certificate list, while Chrome and Edge and the other ones, I think even before Edge became Chrome, all use the operating system's CA. That's pretty crazy to think that the people, all the servers that we're communicating with, uh, for the large portion, have some sort of hierarchy of trust that's pre-baked into the operating system.
Hmm.
uh, Most people should know about that if they're doing any level networking stuff, but it's always just such an eye-opening statement when you first come across it. So the next layer up, back in the 90s, I think, or maybe it was earlier the 80s, is the PGP and the GPG crew were like, well, we don't like that. The whole reason why we have public key cryptography is that we don't have to trust authorities on things.
Hmm.
So Richard Stallman and the other people who are more responsible for it basically said, well, what if we get a ring of people to all sign off on who we think other people are. So now you just have like this peer-to-peer system where like, Alice says that Fred's public key is this, but Bob also says that Fred's public key is this. So you can like look at your friends and see how many of your friends think that Fred is that public key. And now
And tell me why that is so important to you. In what ways have certificate authorities that in our modern world of the web abused this trust?
I don't know if it's a matter of whether it's if it's been abused. It's a matter of whether the system is abusable.
Hmm.
Um, and that is such an important like differentiation because a tyranny is fantastic until it's abused, right? It's just a monopoly, right? Or sorry, a monarchy. Most people like monarchies when they're good. But as soon as the evil twin stabs the good king in the back and becomes the bad tyrant, then we're all like, oh, shoot, I wish we hadn't given all this power away to authority. Previously, we trusted it. So it's just one of those things where the danger and risk is so high if it gets abused that there's no reason ever to give that power away unnecessarily when there's just better approaches for this.
Okay. So given that that's the psychological backing on that, absolutely continue with the explanation of uh, how we technically solve that problem.
So you have a ring of your friends, and those friends are all basically signing off that Fred is this public key, and you can look at the consistency on that. Now, there's plenty of existing talks on what web of trusts are and how you can replace certificate authorities. None of that to me is individually particularly fascinating or innovative or novel. It's then when you take this concept as a whole and start extending it out to things like replacing Google search or doing arbitrary lookups that, so I want to like paint some futuristic user experiences and instead, and then kind of like bridge from the 90s certificate authority replacement type concept all the way up to the application of that stuff. So
That's
right
awesome.
now on
But
Twitter.
before we get into that, though, let's get a bit more of an idea about your personal stake in this and how you've arrived at being so excited about it.
You remind me of Wendy from Internet Archive. I'm one of the like
Well, I mean,
excitable.
it's good to clarify this because oftentimes we get bogged down into just here's the conceptual technology, and we want to know the motivation behind the technology as well. I think that that's just as important.
Oh, yes, that's true. Motivation's easy for me. As an engineer, though, I care so much about the algorithms. I completely forget usually about my like identity, because I just don't think that's important. And I'm pretty, if you grow up in an engineering context, it's fairly conservative. And so yeah, I have a bad problem where I never usually introduce myself. I usually introduce the problem I'm working on. And that's kind of you to ask about myself. And uh, it, yes, I'll get to that in 1 second. I am kind of learning in the last 2 years that apparently people follow people, which I don't understand why. And I do need to probably be a little bit more egotistical. I just want to give this preface that like I am so scared of being egotistical. I just like habitually stay away from that. But I you're right. It people don't really work that way, and I am trying to force myself to be a little bit more egotistical. It's just I'm scared.
Really humble of you to say, but yeah, I don't think that it's egotistical to talk about what your motivations are. It just helps us put ourselves in the right headspace.
Well, no. Motivation was easy, which I already explained, which is like I don't want to depend upon trust. But who I am, Mark Nadal, I run Gun, which is a decentralized protocol with 50 million monthly active users on it. It's just like that sounds like I'm like signaling. And the only reason why I've had success there is because I feel like I've focused on the problems versus focused on the ego. But and it's partly because like I'm terrified of ego because I don't want people to trust me as an authority, right? Like it's circling back to the whole thing. I don't want to be a certificate authority. I don't want people to be like, oh, well, that's Mark Nadal. And so therefore we trust what he says. For me, it's just like, no, npm install gun and mocha and then go into the directory and run the panic tests that try and crash the whole system and simulate failure and see how it performs. I don't like to be trusted as an individual. However, I am learning that if I don't speak out, then apparently blockchain bros, no offense to people out there, and
Well, no offense to me, at least.
the whole rest of the crowd of people who just have really terrible algorithms but pride themselves on increasing unnecessary complexity wind up winning so much attention that um, that okay, I guess maybe ego is an important part of having
or
conversations.
at least grounding for the purpose of this discussion. So you are Martin. You run GunDB. You've raised a bunch of money for this project. So when we're talking about the web of trust, are we keeping in mind GunDB? Are you applying web of trust to GunDB, or is this something that is a completely tangential subject for you?
Any algorithm that I find as being useful, I try to incorporate in my tech. So yeah, I've raised about $2.7 million from Tim Draper and Mark Benioff of Salesforce. I've had the privilege of talking to Jeff Bezos just like a few months ago, and also to Peter Thiel for about an hour and 20 minutes. But while I've had a lot of really fun Pied Piper level Silicon Valley stories, to me, that's still all like this circle club, which I don't really particularly care about. I care about the engineering stuff. But since you're asking,
Right.
yes, I have
Well,
raised money. I have shipped products. I have the 50 million monthly active users. I have over 15,000 stars on GitHub for Gun. It's one of the most popular projects across all of GitHub. Um, and and sure, I have, I guess, some status there. But yeah, again, that's not particularly interesting to Web of Trust. So does Gun itself run Web of Trust? No. It's very important for me as an engineer. We create composable layers, and Web of Trust is one of those things that gets added on top that has incredible optimizations to everything beneath it in a technology stack. So I would not really want to build a decentralized application without using um, a web of trust that's been built on top of Gun.
mhm.
But Gun itself does not require depend upon web of trust to work at a protocol layer. Um, I split these things all out. However, the web of trust gains that you get wind up radically improving uh, Gun's protocol underneath when it comes to performance. And that maybe sounds a little bit odd as how does a thing on top wind up improving the thing underneath's performance? But that would probably be a separate 30-minute podcast or 40-minute
Right.
podcast I could do just on composable technology stacks. So I'm really excited about Web of Trust. So you can go out and use this concept completely separate from Gun, um, and completely separate from my own ego and engineering interests. It's just a great algorithm that I'm trying to now explain in the most maximal extremes um, uh, from my world. And the reason why I'm doing that is because not only does it get rid of authority that I don't want to depend upon or have as an avenue for abuse, it also gives the efficiency gains in order to make these systems scalable and fast
Mhm.
that doesn't need us to require relying upon Google. But again, you could ask the same question: have CAs abused their authority? Has Google abused their authority? And my answer typically is you don't see the abuse of authority because its abuse is invisible until it
Ah,
becomes so systemic, it completely undermines and collapses the entire system. So you don't know how many Google search results they are not displaying because there's no transparency on that. There is DMCA transparency, and that's pretty ironic and funny, right? Which is like you search for some sort of pirated movie, and the search results don't show up, but at the very bottom, Google says, "Hey, these search results have been filtered because of DMCA thing. Click here if you want to see the DMCA complaint," which then goes to a government website, which lists
mhm.
the websites that have the pirated video.
Got it.
Uh, Ironic, right? But
So bridge the gap between the thing that you were talking about in the 90s, having these independent interlocking certificate authorities of trust, and turning this into a full search engine.
Yeah, first let me give you a user experience story, and then I'm
Sure.
gonna jump through. So across all systems, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Discord, you're used to typing in somebody's name and then giving you like this autocomplete prompt of like, hey, like, did you mean Elon Musk? Did you mean Other Jackson? And that's really nice. That's really great because it's using like human readable names that will be converted into the platform specific ID underneath or username alias. You don't have that in a decentralized context because you have to autocomplete not to a user ID or an alias. You have to autocomplete to a public key. Now, there are certainly blockchains that come around and say, oh, the name Elon Musk should be owned by Elon Musk. And there's, oh, that, you know, 9 character, however many character long Elon Musk's name is, UTF-8 sequence is just globally reserved as this .com DNS name everyone has. But it's like, wait, like, okay, there's not that many Elon Musks in the world, but there's plenty of John Smiths, and some are more famous than others. So like, why? When I say mom, you guys know that I'm referencing my mom, not some sort of global mom or your mom. When we, we just naturally have the sense of when we say Jackson or Mark or Justin, because of the context of this call, and Justin's a listener right here. Um, I don't actually know who you are, Justin. I apologize, but we
Thanks
know
for
by
attending, Justin.
we know by context that who we're referencing, and so Web of Trust is saying that name should be contextual to context. And one of the most important and easiest context to check is the context relative to your contact list, relative to you, to your social network.
Hmm.
And it's not just one layer, it's multiple layers. It could be your friend of friend layers. So I'm getting there. One
Yeah,
second.
that's fascinating. Like the idea that you can have an identifier for something that isn't a strong reserved identifier. I'm just imagining, like, yeah, because right now, if in the DNS world or in the blockchain world, you do need to own something. Like if it's mom, then it's mom.com, or I guess I could mint an NFT that's the concept of a mom, which is my new NFT scam. I'm just going to take all of the words from Webster's dictionary and I'm going to mint NFTs on them, and I'm going to pump and dump that. Whee! But yeah, I'm fascinated to hear how, at a more technical level, how we are how we're dealing with the nuance of not of one thing isn't owned concretely by one entity.
Yeah, we already have 4 asides here, and I'm gonna get to all of them. It's just gonna take I gotta tackle each one step by step. But let me mention this new aside you just brought up. We're going to get back to global consensus through this model. Okay, we're going to get back to that. That can be enabled on this system as well, and it is enabled in an even much better way. And just a quick statement on that is a centralized system can be built with a federated system. So federated systems like email. A federated
Right.
system can be built with a decentralized or peer-to-peer system, but you can't go the other direction. You cannot build a federated system with centralization, and you cannot build peer-to-peer or decentralization with a federated system. So it's naturally composable, and so we will be able, through the Web of Trust model, get back up to a global certificate authority type approach where Elon Musk is the only Elon Musk. And that's why this user experience story of me typing in a person's name in
Hmm.
Twitter or Facebook becomes a very accurate capture for understanding how this would work. So first step is it would be very useful rather than when I type in that name, it's only platform specific. You could easily imagine Facebook and Google and others using Prism, which is the NSA spyware stuff underneath that they have to
Hmm.
be compatible with, to share those public identifiers across platforms. I mean, again, it's not even like that's private data. The user IDs and aliases and handles are public IDs in their database that you can look up and just do random queries against, just kind of like DNS. So sure, there might be some privacy concerns there, but it's not like it's particularly private anyways, pragmatically speaking. So there's no reason why you can't imagine some sort of OAuth login model that whenever I type in, whether on Facebook, I get an autocomplete, which includes a Twitter user handle or a Discord user handle. Why not? Like that's something within the realm of centralized services that they're already doing with OAuth type login. But they just don't create an interface for that, even though that interface is pretty easy to imagine. But then you're like, oh, well, okay, like, one username on one platform may not be the same person on another platform because at Jack registered at Jack before another person named Jack registered it on a different platform. So
Right.
this is now getting into a thing called Zuko's triangle, which is considered as a paradox, and you can look that up separately. And I'm just going to ignore it entirely because Web of Trust just gets around Zuko's paradox entirely. Zuko's triangle entirely. And a lot of people will be like, oh, how dare you say that? But we're working through
Do
it.
you want to briefly explain Zuko's triangle since you mentioned it?
No, I want people to, they can just go look it up because it's
Okay.
unimportant. I mean, it's a great framing, but it's unimportant. And I don't want to have to explain an uh, if Zuko's triangle got us towards the solution I'm talking about, that'd be useful to explain. But because it like gets us away from what I'm trying to explain, I'm just gonna, and that's part of what I'm doing in algorithm podcasts is we just like very quickly try and run through algorithmic explanations of something while name dropping a bunch of other algorithms such that people can take notes and look those up. It's not that we are trying to jargon reference in any way, shape, or form. Actually, the whole point of algorithm explanation is to explain all the branches of a particular algorithm in just a human conversations. That way you can understand it like you're 5 or something like that. Because at the end of the day, it's really not that hard. However, because there's so many different branches in computer science and each particular choice or trade-off that you can make, the possible exploration space expands so quickly that tag you have to tag like, oh, we're not going to go down this part of the maze right now. And that part of the maze is called this particular jargon, which we maybe will talk about on the next podcast. But if you want to like understand that or look into that, meanwhile, like go search this jargon phrase and see somebody else's like I'm 5 explanation. Oh wait, so now we've gone into 2 tangents before even going back to the 3 other tangents.
That
So
spent a lot of time explaining why we shouldn't explain Zuko's triangle. But let's go back to the previous tangent then, since it doesn't matter.
yeah, sorry. I apologize. Typically, I spend more time justifying something than it would take to explain something, but it's just my passionate, excitable nature.
That's
So
okay. I love the passion.
that's my identity. That's the Mark Nadal. You're not going to like Mark Nadal if you don't like his excited tangents into whatever. So the user experience story here is, well, okay, I type in Jack or I type in Elon Musk or I type in you're correct. It would still be useful to get a Google search like ranking on what the global consensus of who the top Elon Musk is. Okay.
Hmm.
So now, in order to do that type of search, we now have to step back and figure out, well, how do we do decentralized global search ranking? And that then is, aha, okay, we already have this peer-to-peer trusted attestation method of Web of Trust that gives us a type of a truthiness claim that, like I mentioned earlier, back in the 90s, Alice, Bob, and Carl, who are all my friends, all said, hey, I think Fred's public key is this. So if you can just, there's many different ways you can slice and dice this, but I'm going to just go through the naive approach first and then combine it. If you just count up that, like, well, 5 of my other friends are all testifying to the same public key on Fred, then like that's a score of 5, right? Because 5 of my friends verified it. Now, obviously,
Hmm.
that breaks down a little bit when you're dealing with this like, well, friend of friend thing. And I want to now step back really quickly and discuss what is an important concept is the 6 degrees of separation, frequently called the Kevin Bacon effect. I don't know why he just somehow became popular for 6 degrees of separation.
It's a
That
fun
is,
game.
hmm?
You just every actor is connected to Kevin Bacon.
Yes, yes, exactly. And the math behind this was research scientists who were doing it with physical mail forwarding. So it turns out if, and thankfully, 6 degrees of separation, a lot of people have heard of it, but I'm still gonna. This is a useful thing to re-explain, even if it's understood by people already, compared to Zuko's, which no offense to Zuko, it is an interesting postulation, but not useful to reiterate. Not saying you shouldn't look it up, you should. So 6 degrees of separation was based off of physical mail forwarding. That was multiple independent researchers who found out that if I sent a physical letter to some random person and said, "Hey, I am trying to find XYZ person. Do you maybe know anybody who's related to that you could forward this physical mail to?" They were finding they could reach any person in the globe through physical mail forwarding within 6 physical mail hops. As soon as that comes online, their network sizes can be much larger than like Dunbar's number or like community numbers.
Right.
Dunbar numbers is also a very interesting thing. Should be probably discussed here, but go look it up separately because I want to keep on going, keep on rolling. And across Facebook has done its own research, and they have found it's about 3.5 degrees of hops within inside of Facebook. An independent researcher has looked at that on Twitter, and they've also produced the same number, about 3.5 degrees of hops. And then Marty Malmy, who I mentioned at the very beginning, was the very first contributor to Satoshi on Bitcoin in like 2009, 2010. He ran this web of trust type analysis against the Bitcoin public key trading network, and also found that after 4 degrees of separation, there's suddenly this like massive explosion of these interconnected public keys that are just like completely irrelevant and disconnected to the majority of other like public keys in the network. And I was like, oh, that like actually matches up with like Facebook and Twitter research. That probably indicates that that's a bot trading network doing like a bunch of fake exchanges between themselves. And that's fascinating. So you can like use this degrees of separation to kind of infer or calculate the line between where bots might emerge, Sybil attacks, which is a phrase that blockchain people use a lot and is actually pretty useful. So go look that up. You can use this web of trust and the consistent research that's been done to kind of create a constraint on a probability of what legitimate accounts are. And again, it's all
Hmm.
probabilities, but you can, using a couple other things, which I'm going to lead us towards, use those probability and constraints to then backwards figure out who's the most attested Elon Musk. So I'm going to now pause and jump back to that user experience story, do a variation of it to explain it in like a concrete UX type way you'd interact with the system, and then jump back to the whole web of trust model of like, how do we go from like, I just counted up my 5 friends, but then like, well, how do I count my friend of a friend of a friend? And do I even trust
Right.
that? All right. So right now, you can type in Elon Musk into DuckDuckGo, Brave Search, Google, Yandex, Bing, Yahoo search, and there's like one other pretty big search system. And this is what Dogpile did back in like mid late 90s. It was just like, wait, why don't we be a search engine that searches all the search engines and composites the results? But PageRank with Google wound up being so successful that uh, yeah. So
Hmm.
PageRank is a type of, you can think of PageRank as a type of web of trust algorithm too.
Indeed.
Although
It,
PageRank is
it
part
is
of Google's.
it is implemented in a centralized manner, but similarly, it is using uh, matrix manipulation in order to figure out how things should be ranked, versus a complete discrete. This is the answer, one-to-one mapping between this concept and like a search term and a website. So, but it is centralized.
Exactly. And that was a great explanation. Unfortunately, though, the most important search results on Google are no longer really running PageRank. There's, these three layers. PageRank was good enough that it was explosively better than everything else because it's kind of following this web of trust type approach or philosophy, and it's pretty neat, like the generalizability of this. But then you start getting the introduction of content farms that are exploiting that are just like creating a bunch of different domains in order to leverage that assumption that a domain, it is the Sybil attack problem. So
Indeed.
they've
And
been
actually, I do want to touch on that because how does a web of trust model, how is it resilient against something similar to a content farm where I just spam the web with a bunch of things that says, hey, Elon Musk is actually Jackson Morgan. And if I have enough of that going with a farm, then I could I could get the web of trust to believe that Elon Musk is actually Jackson Morgan. Uh, is there what are the protections against something like that?
That is the most important kicker question, and it's
Right.
why I'm so excited about Marty's algorithm for Iris and stuff. However, it 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 sounds absurd unless we work through first understanding web trusts itself, because web of trust itself, the more basic concept is unfortunately not as well understood. Like I think a lot of people know about PageRank, but they don't realize it's applicable to all these other areas. So I kind of still want to focus on like PageRank and Web of Trust and this intermediate layer and how to like first just decentralize the crummy version. There we go. The brute force version of a thing, which might have exploitable vectors that you're talking about.
Right.
And then we can add in these optimizations on top that seal those things off. But if we don't have a really good foundation, at a protocol layer for this, then there's just no forward progress in the first place. So yeah, we're gonna tag that question, the most important question in the entire talk podcast. But it's a great question. I think save it for later. So I think which random rabbit hole was I on in this tree of branches? I was giving this DuckDuckGo, Yandex. Oh, sorry, PageRank, and I do want to go over kind of the evolution of Google. So the way that
Okay.
Google addressed this as a centralized system is they started doing machine learning models against all of the data they have and using that to have better reinforcement on PageRank to avoid these content farms, because the content farms are effectively using a type of plagiarizing technique, whether it's blatant copy and paste to exploit these. And so you're then, if you're able to learn against the data sets, you're able to see the patterns in the data sets and then able to deduplicate that. So rather than using DNS or domain as the unique property for Sybil, you're effectively using like some sort of plagiarism detection score to determine what the identity of a system is. And then now you're still running PageRank, but it's now constrained against the 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 AI text vector, the word vector of the word vector concept of the content, um, which is its whole own other layer, as what counts as the population or the identity in the system that you're doing these um, uh, depth check against. Like where do the bots begin, and how many of my friends are bots? Check. Um, and that's how it still exists today, except for the naivety where we hate Facebook more because Facebook states this is what your friends are saying, and maybe you don't like what your friend of a friend is saying, and so we get angry that maybe I shouldn't say we. A lot of people get angry that Facebook is allowing false information from their uncle to be spread, and so Facebook must be the gatekeepers of truth. But because Google and Wikipedia have this implicit assumption that that is global objective consensus truth, Like a lot of people don't even bother to question whether the search results that are being surfaced are not actually objective or not. And so for the because they've come to trust over time this is an objective system. Sure, we know maybe I'm getting geographically different search results, but we're okay with that. We want geographic context. What we're not understanding is for the probably top million searches on Google, especially the ones that are currently trending, which you can look at their Zeitgeist calculator to see which phrases are trending. Um, Google has not only a team of AI researchers, which are trying to do the advanced modeling on that, which has its own implicit propaganda that gets encoded based off of the data that they're choosing to clean. Let's just ignore that for a second. That's a whole fascinating ethics problem on its own. Let's just go straight to the top, which is that even after that, in the same way Facebook has a huge team of moderators every moment looking for quote fake news that's getting reshared inside of the social network, not even like the news sidebar, okay, or the trending sidebar. Google has the exact same layer of teams that are doing that for top search results and conveniently omitting certain results that the AI thought were high or that PageRank thought was high and
Mhm.
injecting in their own content team moderator bias. But because the user experience, we've been trained over time with Wikipedia and Google to assume that this is like running through some sort of global consensus approach, we're just like not aware of the abuse that's happening by authorities because usually the abuse is invisible.
So, when just coming from a philosophical perspective, are you saying that it is preferable to have to use the result that would come from, say, AI that's trained on search patterns or something more simple like PageRank? That is preferable to having human moderators?
The thesis statement on that philosophy is that tools should enable our decisions. They should not make the decisions for us. Unfortunately, centralization leads to somebody making the decision for us, even if that company has incredible tools that enable that decision. And so relative to that philosophical question, like that's the more important concept is tools should enable decision. They shouldn't make decisions. And that's controversial on many different layers. So I don't want to unpack that here because I still want to focus on then like getting up to how do we get some sort of global consensus and all the different angles you can slice this that will start unveiling that decision making process, whether it's centralized or not. So
Yeah.
I don't really have a I I have my own personal preference, but my own personal preference to the answer that you're saying is irrelevant to the importance of the enablement of what the system does, because this system enables you to take any different approach that you want.
Indeed.
And yeah, okay.
Yeah. Because
So
just to keep in mind that just because a system might seem objective, even if it's PageRank or if it's an AI, they have input data. And that input data is already something where people have made a decision. People have made a decision to create that data. So it's not as if because the tool is created by that, or because the result of that tool is created by that input data, means that the tool already isn't objective. So I just want to establish that there isn't necessarily such thing as an objective truth, but as we're talking about these algorithms, determining which ones enable the proper results that we would want to have are, um, things that we can look at. Um, so,
yeah,
but we don't
let's
want to
do
delude ourselves to say that there is an objective, that any algorithm can create objective truth.
it is like such an important statement. I'm so glad you're reiterating. I want to do a whole podcast. We probably need at least 3 or 4 podcasts on just AI ethics and data set training and cleaning. It's so critically important. So let's schedule that. Okay, so one thing that you can do to actually litmus test the objectivity of Google is to just like run the same search result across many different search engines and see what the rankings are. Now, I'm not saying that that will produce a globally consistent truth, but it's just an extra check. So this is like going back to Dogpile of the 90s, if anybody remembers that search engine. And the cool thing in the case of popular people with unique names like Elon Musk or Vitalik Buterin, which sorry, you because I was commenting on one of our other podcasts that, um, sorry, coming
Yeah.
back to um, that across those 8 search engines, DuckDuckGo, Bing, Brave Search, Google, Yandex, and the other one, you effectively only get 2 top search results. It's either Elon Musk's Twitter page or his Wikipedia page. And that's pretty fascinating. I mean, there's obviously other search results for Elon Musk that show up on the top 9 results or whatever it is on each engine. But you can now do a simple math equation, which is taking like the Venn diagram of those results, and you're probabilistically going to get that the top search result, and you can just go do this right now to confirm what I'm saying, unless the search results have changed since Elon Musk's latest tweet. The Venn diagram across the top results of each one of those search engines, which itself is the aggregation of top results across these AI systems and manual creations and page rank algorithms and blah, 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 is going to show that Elon Musk's Twitter URL is the highest scored one. And that's fascinating. So it's like, why don't we already have user like why are our browsers like we can set the search engine that we want in our browsers. Typically, people just use the default ones, but like, why on earth are browsers? And sorry, there is an answer to that. Firefox gets paid a lot of money by Google to be the default search engine. But like, why on earth, from a user experience standpoint, are our browsers in the omnibar? Because everybody has kind of moved away from DNS, sorry, from URLs to first, checking against the URL, and then if that's not a URL, then going back to a search. Why are we not just performing 7 different um, search queries to 7 different search engines, and then the browser giving us an aggregated scored result across the overlap of those 7? That's super scalable because Google and Bing and Yandex and already handle millions of requests, and you're now just distributing that across 7 of them who are already capable of handling that, and then they already give you optimized results of top 10. They're already giving you, and so it's not that hard with computers these days to just intersect a Venn diagram those results in a search page. Just like, why is this not already happening? Okay, now take this to the next level. Also combine it with all the D-Web protocols, all the blockchains, and um, your friends. So now let's come back to the 90s and Web of Trust.
Hmm.
Okay, so if I have a contact list of my friends and I happen to be able to reach my friend, whether it be by a phone number or by a URL or by their Twitter alias, um, we all have, we're thankfully privileged enough that we all have phones, and our phones have contact lists in them already. Now, maybe I don't want to share my contact list with people. That's fine. Just that's a whole separate conversation of how you would do what I'm about to explain in a completely homeomorphic or encrypted, end-to-end encrypted type setting. But let's just, for 1 second, let's be annoying and just assume that I'm okay with sharing my contact list with my friends. And maybe even friend a friend and friend a friend a friend, even though we know that already hits the whole global population. Just for a second, let's assume our contact lists are public.
Okay.
Rather than me typing in a phone number or a name into Google, let alone across 7 different search engines, why can't I perform that search query where my computer says, hey, I just looked for um, uh, Mark Nadal. I'll just take myself. And it sent that search phrase out to 9 of my friends just randomly. Okay. I mean, you could have a separate scoring structure. Like, well, maybe I trust certain friends more, or maybe like it automatically gets sent to the friends that I talk to the most or I text the most. That's its own system that's useful to explore, but it's just an abstraction here because this works over any of those. So let's just pretend my search query, which is for a person's name, okay, to relate this to phone numbers, gets sent to 9 of my current friends in my contact list. And literally just imagine that that's like an SMS that goes out to a text message that goes out to 9 random friends and says, hey, do you know Mark Nadal? Will you please reply with their phone number? But obviously you could do this at a machine level that just returns it algorithmically. But let's think about it from a human level. So then 9 of my random friends, maybe some don't reply. That's fine. But say 3 respond back with like, oh yeah, like I think I know that Mark Nadal person, and his phone number is 760-689-2468. I'm okay sharing that publicly because it's already plenty of other places.
Get ready for everyone to blow up your DMs, texting you.
I get so many spam calls, but it's fine because I use my own techniques to filter out
Mhm.
spam systems. So, so it's this is the same thing that's happening as that public key attestation and web trust to replace certificate authorities way back in the 90s, except for rather than responding with a phone number, you're responding with the public key of that person. Um, and so obviously as a human, I'm not necessarily going to be able to like type in the public key of my friend. But it's trivial to then imagine, the contact list app on our phones just automatically knows how to reply to these queries with a public key. But expand that. Let's say it doesn't just respond with a public key. Pretend it responds with like multiple different keys. Your solid URL identifier,
Mhm.
a gun public key, a Twitter URL, a phone number. It just like responds with all of the addresses. That's pretty trivial. It's not that hard to add that additional step. And now my phone receives these. So now I'm not even asking Google or 7 different search engines for their top results. I'm actually asking my friends for these search results. But now I'm going to say, actually compose both of those together. I'm going to ask Google and Bing and DuckDuckGo and Google Search and 9 of my random friends. And we're going to take it one layer deeper, okay? When my friends receive that request, okay? No, actually, to explain 2 layers deep of Web of Trust, you have to already understand how the 0th layer does indexing. So I get these responses back from 9 of my random friends. Okay, maybe only 3 replied, but now it's automated. And Google. It then takes for multiple different addresses, scores and ranks all of them, and does the Venn diagram overlap and gives me a search result. Now, I wanted to take that search result concept and now actually inject that everywhere you type on the internet, whether that be in the URL bar or a search result, whether that be in Twitter or Facebook, and you get that autocomplete, okay, the search results just show up as autocomplete ranked. Now, I can like go through and choose which one I want in each context. But the very first time I choose one, it's going to do a prompt of saying, hey, do you want this to be your top result for you personally, locally? So when I type in mom and I choose actually my real mom, not like your mom, because the search result for mom is is different for you that I got back
Right.
from me. And I say, yeah, actually, like I type in mom, it gives me a list of moms, and I see my mom, who's Linda Nadal, and I go down and click enter on that to autocomplete, or I click on that search result from this hypothetical search engine response. Um, there's many different ways, but like because you can also just use frequency of how many times I choose that result as a way to determine whether that's going to be my local personalized top result. But let's just say there's an explicit prompt from a UX standpoint. That's not necessarily the best way to do it, but let's just say that's there. And I say like, yeah, I want mom to be my top. Sorry, I want Linda Nadal with this phone number with this public key. I didn't necessarily have to add all of that. It's just like going to automatically inject it in from the data it already has. And I say, yes, I want this to be my top result. Boom. Now think about it. Now my contact lists are ranked. So then when my friend is doing the exact same thing, and my friend searches for Linda Nadal, my mom, okay? They search for Linda Nadal. They're like, who is this Linda Nadal person? Are they related to Mark Nadal? That search query goes out to Google, Bing, Yandex. It also goes to 9 of the random friends. Friends happen to be me. And I have a ranked human curated top result for Linda Nadal. And that ranked top result was actually me already indexing the top result across all of my friends. Okay. So when Fred performs this Linda Nadal query that goes out to all these systems, goes to me, and I reply within one hop back to Fred, the information that's been encoded in that response is actually the indexed result of already my friends of friends. So that query he performed is effectively the same as if he performed the query out to not just 9 random of his immediate friends, but it's actually as if it was performed out to the friends of the friends, which the whole world's population is connected pretty much within 3.5, 4 degrees hops. Actually, it's not quite true. Half of the world is online. And so uh, Google and Facebook and Twitter's calculations is in some portion of that. So let's just say half of the world's population is within, but I suspect those numbers will hold as they continue to grow. That's mind-boggling. You've now indexed nearly half of the world's population in 7 plus 9 queries that are itself have O1 search results to them. And now Fred, for that Linda Nadal result, is still on their computer going to do this Venn diagram, this AI-based kind of like scoring rank of those results. And then Fred himself, if it's an important enough query, can wind up indexing who he thinks is the top Linda Nadal. Maybe it's the Linda Nadal to the Twitter page versus the Linda Nadal to the Facebook page. But at the end of the day, it's modeled. So that is where I'm going to end on the concrete UX piece, and then jump back to your most important question of
Right.
can we get back to global consensus, some sort of objective truth?
Or the other most important question that I want to be sure is answered in this podcast is how do you prevent the kinds of same problems that you get with the Google bombing and people putting out a bunch of real just bad untrue data and that dominating the search results?
Yes, it is so much fun. um, a lot of that is incidentally handled just through using these multiple indexes, which are indexes of indexes, and doing the weighted ranked scored on the Venn diagram of the results, just probabilistically speaking. Because, and I'm going to step back and explain, even though that's not the end game for me of how it's done, because you're correct. There's still ways to exploit those systems until we introduce this last variable, which is like the mind-blowing piece of the mind-blowing piece of the mind-blowing piece that I learned as I was figuring out Marty's teaching me about web of trust. and he's not super vocal, so now I have to go out and evangelize this. I'm not saying he agrees with everything I'm saying, but it's my own synthesis of it. So when it comes to just this Venn diagram approach of many different search results from a probabilistic standpoint of dealing with Sybil attacks and content farms and junk like that. It boils down to the simple fact that lies have a larger entropy space than truths. So if I'm describing Alice, Alice is a female Caucasian that is 29 and has red hair. Sure, she might change her hair over time. Let's ignore time for a second, just to model this because it still works. The amount of untrue things that can be said about Alice is effectively infinite. Alice has climbed the Mount Everest. Alice is the CEO of Foo Corp. In order to get consensus on lying, okay, you need collusion, and that's going to be addressed in a minute with this additional variable I add. But just probabilistically speaking, the overlap of the same search results winds up probabilistically giving us a sort of like truthiness consistency. Not because I don't want to make a claim because that is objective truth. It's just that like from a mathematical layer, even a cryptographic layer, the entropy that exists on false statements that can be said about a person is infinite, and the number of true statements that can be said about somebody is necessarily finite. Or at least when you take the word vector, like the conceptually trained like knowledge graph machine learned model of the true statements of somebody, it's finite. So now it doesn't necessarily mean that it is true that Alice is a redhead or that Alice is 29 or 28 years old or whatever it is. But it's much difficult in order to, you're just probabilistically going to get overlaps. And because you're now taking the overlap of the overlap of the overlap, probabilistically speaking, you're more likely to be getting at least what is consistent across systems. And usually people view consistency as a type of truth. That you're correct. It's not necessarily true, but for this current level of modeling, of thinking about stuff, yay, cool, okay, let's just roll with it. That doesn't necessarily stop this collusion problem. The collusion problem is broken down into two categories. We are at the top of the hour. Should we start? Should we basically say, okay, this is the first section, and the next section, you still need all of this knowledge to get up to doing a correct collusion Sybil resistant approach? Or should we just go another 15, 30 minutes?
Of course, anyone can drop off if they want to, but I think that this is the most important question in my mind. So I would love to hear it.
Yeah, and it is the most important question, but if you start with the wrong foundation, then it almost becomes impossible to answer these questions, or it becomes so convoluted and confusing. That's why I wanted to focus most of on just first understanding web trusts. So the collusion stuff of the Sybil attacks, collusion, breaks down into two problems. Does your immediate first degree level of friends collude against you? And or if they don't, does the 3.5 degrees of separation out collude against you? So the first naive approach to this is to do a weighted rank against those results, where I basically say, because everybody within 1 degree, my friends, not friend of friends, is people that I've already like curated. I'm not saying I necessarily trust the people I follow on Twitter, but like conceptually, let's just ignore, because you can have a separate scoring mechanism for that, but from a user experience standpoint, people don't really want to score their acquaintances. It's just a pain. So let's just ignore that. We can discuss that on a separate chat. Or you can just have 100 different applications that all try different approaches to it and see which one's sticky from a UX standpoint. Just going with this current assumption, but it's not critical to the system, that let's just say I want the ranked results from my immediate first degree of friends to represent 90% bias in my results. So then when I'm getting these other results, which are the friend of the friend, friend of the friend of the friend, or DuckDuckGo or Bing or Google's search results, if they say something, if even if all those people say something consistent um, to each other, even though they don't necessarily know each other. Um, I I've told the system I want to bias my friends' results to being 80% preferred over the other system, and that's a pretty naive approach and gives you something nice because it gives you a local search, it gives you global search, and it gives you like the bias that you're looking. The issue is coming back to that kind of disclaimer I was making. I was like, well, do people even really trust their acquaintances? You know, when I click like I accept you on LinkedIn or whatever, does that implicitly mean like, I actually know who this person is? No. There's a whole UX problem on that, but people are not going to like go into their friends and do this like scoring. So the smarter approach, it doesn't handle this naive approach does not handle um, if my friends happen to collude against me. And I'm going to give an example of this. If I'm in North Korea, or take your favorite dictatorial authoritarian government, and I'm like blocked on the internet, like I'm only allowed to have friends or send mail to people that exist within inside of this walled garden, um, then there's a high probability that I'm a soldier and I'm on the North Korea South Korea border, and maybe I want to run away. But I know that my 9 other soldier buddies may not let me run away, even though maybe we're buddies at the barracks, because there's a sort of loyalty or consensus norm inside of the culture, or inside of the company, or inside of this army. So I can't just have this 90%. We can't hard code this web of trust distributed search algorithm just like 80% bias towards um, the immediate friend group or contact list, because there's no way for the library developer, the protocol developer, to be able to gauge or know the meaning of that relationship without creating this additional UI prompt, which nobody's going to fill out. Um,
Indeed. Also, just to add, like you also have a problem when your friends do collude with you. There are problems that can come up from there. Imagine a politician who has been engaged in a scandal and wants that scrubbed from search results. Well, their friends probably also will be in line with them, and if we are weighting like 80% towards friends, then it's quite easy for a politician to scrub that from search results, which is a world that we don't want to live in. We want to see scandals that politicians have been involved in.
Extremely important. I just want to clarify something. That would be the politician seeing their own search results because their friend scrubbed it for them, not necessarily what me or somebody else would see. It's not, because again, remember, none of these search results are actually global. They're all based off of the aggregated response of my friends. And so each person's search is going to get a different search results back, but you can get back to a type of global consensus through the consistency and the stuff. But you're correct. Let's say I am that politician. I then search the system and I think, ha 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 ha, I've scrubbed the internet of these bad results, when I don't actually understand. I'm just mirroring what my friends are saying. And uh, people who live in a peaceful setting, uh, the reason why I'm walking through this like North Korea, South Korea, or this politician exploit problem is because for myself, I have the privilege of, for the most part, trusting my friends. And so I want to walk through a scenario of like where this could become the same algorithm that I'm proclaiming as being like so exciting and wonderful could lead to extraordinarily dystopian results for people in potentially these dangerous refugee or humanitarian situations. And so I'm trying to be intellectually honest to address that the assumptions I have, even on these excitable algorithms, could result in bad approaches if, yeah, I'm this soldier um, on the front lines and my network is necessarily polluted. Um, because the bias at the protocol developer, me, happened to inject some sort of like 80% uh, assumed bias as the default into the code. So because your friends could collude with you, I guess it's going back to the motivation you asked me at the very beginning. It's not even that I don't even trust authority or Google or some president or dictator. I don't even necessarily trust my friends. Sorry, guys. I love you.
Oh, no.
I don't necessarily trust you. I don't want the algorithms to have any opportunity for any layer of trust to be exploited. And now that's why maybe this differentiation between me saying webs of trust versus web of trust becomes so important, because as we get further and further into this rabbit hole of how I'm constructing it, I'm having to explain it from a PageRank web of trust type understanding that people loosely have and explaining how exciting that is, but then evolving to a point where, wait a second, we don't even want to have the trust in the first place. It's still a web of trust algorithm, but how do we improve it over time? And the kicker now is, aha. Remember at the very beginning, actually not in the beginning, in the middle where I said, what if the rank I was giving was just like I counted up the number of friends that said, and like 7 replied with the phone number for Fred, or the public key is being this. And then I was complaining, well, like, what does this number 7 even mean when you have like 6 degrees of separation? Like, do I count up my friends, or do I count up everybody who's replied? But in order to know who's everybody's replied, I'd have to know how it's been aggregated. So like, what does this number mean? Oh, 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 oh. Take what user interfaces and machine learning models are doing in the first place, which is constraint-based programming, and apply that to all these iterations of this web of trust that we've built up that's already doing the consistency, the consistency of the consistency of the consistency overlap of statements. It is true that there seems to be some sort of rough global consensus that the population of humans on the planet is 8 billion-ish. Maybe I've been lied to, okay? But it really doesn't matter, because when you run through what's called the handshake equation, and I have a talk I will send people if they want to understand the math on that, the combinatorics on the handshake equation, because it actually goes beyond combinatorics, it goes beyond exponential. The different ways you can recombine. Okay, fine. Sorry. Now I'm explaining a thing. It's 1:08. I'm going to see if I can get this done in the next 20 minutes. So I'm going to explain 3 minutes on handshake equation. The
Okay.
handshake equation is related to this idea of 6 degrees of separation. If you are Facebook and you have these 2.5 billion users, maybe that number's larger now. That was like a couple years ago. You can see the whole social graph, and they very much utilize that. The handshake equation says how many individual connections a handshake is there across the entire network. So this is what speed dating is for business people, or just speed dating in general. I go to a conference. I can always follow up with somebody afterwards if there's a particularly interesting business use case or partnership I can form. So to be strategic, you want to maximize exchanging as many business cards as you can at the conference, and then following up with the ones that are particularly relevant. Because if you don't bother meeting as many people at the conference, you don't necessarily know what you're missing out on. You don't know what you don't know. In the same way, a Google search result, abuse happens and it's invisible. So the handshake equation is basically saying, all right, if you're a good businessman from a logistics standpoint, you want to maximize what you don't know, so that way later you can follow up with what you do know. But you want to like first clear out the exploration space of what you don't know. So basically get as many business cards as possible. So the handshake equation is, at a conference, how many business cards were exchanged. It's deduplicating it across each person, right? And even though it's deduplicating, because me to Fred is a single handshake, as Fred is to me, um, uh, that algorithm or equation, even though it is deduplicated, is still beyond combinatoric. And the way I like to explain this, again, I've written articles on this, and I'll send people blog posts on this, that I like to walk people through is, okay, we're Facebook, and pretend that we actually did sell user data. Facebook actually doesn't sell user data, because that's their gold mine. They sell They sell matching to the data, because if they were to sell that data, then the advertiser would never need to come back to Facebook. But let's just say we're Facebook, and for $1 price, or whatever the price wants to be, whether it be cent or dollar or whatnot, we're going to sell all the handshakes at a certain price point to an advertiser with indefinite royalty until that company dies. So effectively, for the next 100 years, you have unlimited access to just these handshakes between people. And if Facebook were to set the price to be 1% of 1 penny for a handshake, and you're an advertising company with unlimited budget, how much do you think it would cost to buy every handshake across Facebook? We know that most of the handshakes are not going to be particularly useful, because the handshake between Mark and some random person in the world is going to have pretty much zero data on it. But that's fine. It's 1% of 1 penny for me to buy that handshake with all indefinite information that accumulates on it for an entire lifetime at one low price. And so I'm a government, I'm the NSA, I'm CIA, or I'm an advertising company, and I have unlimited money. How much do you think the handshake will cost, buying every single handshake for 1% of 1 penny across just Facebook's network is? Take a guess.
Um, I am not sure, but is this related to the decentralized network? Are you proposing that a decentralized web of trust network would want to buy all of these handshakes?
I'm using an analogy to get towards the extremes of the system that can then be applied to how we fix the problem from before. So I know it's an aside, but it's it's so much of innovation is when two people in different industries and niches wind up realizing that they can cross-pollinate a particular algorithm or solution into a combined solution that then like blows everything away.
Okay, I will just to move things along. I'll say $19 billion. Let's that.
Awesome guess. $19 billion is actually a fantastic guess, because you know that the handshake is going to be some sort of combinatoric or exponential, and there's 2.5 billion people, and so 19 billion is, across 1% of 1 penny. Yeah, it's a great guess. No, it's $200 trillion, which is 10 times the U.S. national debt, and more than double the entire world GDP. Now, if we say, okay, like that's a really big number, now I'm confused why we're even talking about it, because it just seems so wrong and absurd. Let's say, oh, okay, let's just admit 98% of that are useless handshakes. But 2% of those handshakes are going to be extremely valuable, knowing that like Warren Buffett is friends with uh, Bill Gates. I mean, I guess everybody knows that already, but you get my point. Like some of those handshakes and all the data
Warren
associated.
Buffett is friends with MBS. There we go. That's something juicy. If
I don't know who MBS
oh,
is.
Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince.
Whoo! Right? Yeah, very interesting. And then pretend you also have access to all of the data in that relationship. So, and we know WhatsApp, the encryption keys are somewhere on Facebook servers. So even though it's end-to-end encrypted, oops, you just bought the encryption keys and you're able to decrypt all those conversations. Whoa! Right? Okay. So we're just saying 2% of the $200 trillion you had to have just spent, and that's why you had to have unlimited budget, because it's more than the entire world GDP and 10 times the U.S. national debt. Oh, actually, not U.S. national debt exploded in the last 2 years, so that number might be less now. Um, Even if you just take 2% of that number, 1% of $200 trillion is what, 2 trillion, right? 2 trillion is still like the entire market cap of Amazon, right? Um, so so you only have two options here. Either I'm a crazy madman that's saying that like handshake and network equations produce numbers so large they're inconceivable, so something's just flat out wrong, or there's something extremely fascinating about decentralized networks and being able to do analysis on them. So, because if you were to take the handshake of 7 people, actually, sorry, if you were to take the handshake of Facebook's total user count and drop the Facebook total user count by just 100 people, you're going to get a wildly different handshake number because it's beyond combinatoric. And the difference between these handshake results gives you a indication of the error in a system. The error in a system is what you're potentially not seeing.
Okay, and then are you proposing using that error to try and combat Google bombing or whatever the decentralized equivalent of Google bombing is?
Yes. So we only need to hard code one approximate number into this algorithm from the beginning in order to deal with this refugee or humanitarian crisis issue, which is already an edge case. As long as, and the hard-coded number should be able to be modified in the settings, but it shouldn't have to be something somebody can modify. As long as we hard code that human population is roughly 8 billion, and it doesn't have to be an actual integer, maybe it's some sort of number that will grow over time, predicting human population. As long as we have some sort of loose, rough consensus within some sort of ballpark number on that, that is the constraint, okay, 8 billion people that we're able to apply to the web of trust 3.5 degrees separation to do verification. So now I don't have to worry about whether my friends are immediately colluding to me or not, or if I'm a conspiracy theorist and the whole world is colluding against me or not. When you run the ranking algorithms on this web of trust, where, let's say I ask 7 different just established search engines and I ask 9 of my different friends and they give me the results, and their results are already the aggregated indexed results of their friends of friends, and I then do my own personal ranking on top of that. The bias that I can do can automatically be slid to both ends of that extreme as a constraint against world population. And this is actually important for search results that don't have much response. You're going to get the Elon Musk as a top result just off of the first piece. It's when I search for something that not very many people have already indexed or know about, that you get the creep for this type of collusion. Because, like, yeah, some content farm decides they're going to take the phrase Web3, years and years and years ago before it became a popular thing, and create a Sybil attack content farm on that, and just make sure all search engines and all of your friends are indexing it as is. And then once that search term goes from obscurity into interest, then suddenly you've already pre-mined colluding this thing in advance. But being able to now use the world population as a constraint, how it actually works is more technical and interesting, but I'm not going to go into it because there's another piece to this constraint that is even more I don't want to say more important, but I want to address in the last 10 minutes. So to finish, that constraint, we don't need to trust arbitrarily the 6 degrees of separation and 3.5 degree research that has happened as being a hard coded thing, that like, oh, maybe bots are after 3.5 degrees, so therefore we're going to ignore that. We already know the constraint in the system. And so now we're able to, every time, check these results against the constraint in the system and as it dynamically evolves over time. Because if 7 of my friends all send back a consistent, 7 out of 7, pretend they're the soldiers in the barrack in North Korea, okay? Should I flee to South Korea, or is South Korea a propaganda machine that talks about freedom? But, you need to stay here in North Korea. And they all say, stay here in North Korea. And that was by default 80% biased or weighted towards my first degree separation. And the second degree, third degree, and fourth degrees. Well, okay, so there's an important piece. Is pretend I'm not even able to get out to that second degree because being in this North Korean setting, like my friend network, literally, I don't have an ability to physically mail past this network. The very fact that we've injected that the world population may be roughly 8 billion without any additional information, without actually being able to index the index of the index, without being able to actually go to first, second degree, third degree, or knowing where the cutoff point or the slope on that is before it turns into a bot, gives me a way to say, ooh, there is a 100% confidence score on the bias of our ranked friends, but there's a 98% counterweighted indeterminacy, potential error rate on this. And so now you just mix those two numbers together and you get your final score. And your final score is hinting at what you don't know.
Okay. So then this essentially reduces down to what we have is a federated query system that s says based on the results that have been returned and how many uh, entities out there I think exist. Here is what the weight of our confidence in this information is. And
All
yeah, go ahead.
all three layers, correct. You're doing confidence score on how many web trusts out before you think there might be bots. You're doing a confidence score against what potentially is collusion in your friends, and you're also doing a confidence score against what could be possible number of search results that maybe you have not gotten back because you don't have access to the network or that phrase is particularly and that's why it's taken an hour and a half to discuss, because each one of those layers importantly has to have its own piece that you're describing right now. And so if you describe it in a single sentence, you just described three different algorithms, all of which are not very well understood, and all of which have their own trade-offs, problems, and vulnerabilities that then have to be addressed. And now you've combined it across all three of each one of those things across all three to get now this end result. And I have one last piece to end with. Of course, if
Okay.
there's any other questions, I wanna go over them. But the last piece here is that theme I said in the middle of the talk. These systems should not make the decision for us. They should aid our thinking. So, what if we take this 1 degree further, literally? I get my I don't know what I don't know, but I know my friends are colluding and it either agrees with or doesn't agree with out to web of trust distance, 6 degree separation, hopefully not botnet score. But what if that result itself can be explored, surfed, and navigated on the web? What if I could step into Elon Musk's shoes and see what his results might be? Obviously, there's a huge privacy thing right here, and just give me a moment to ignore the privacy implications. What if I could step into my mom's shoes and see her search results? Okay, stepping into an individual person's shoes may not be particularly important. What if I step into the shoes of an average Asian population, or an average British population, or an average Indian or uh, South African population? Because John Smith, there's a particular famous actor who's well known in the United States. I think it's the Captain America guy. What is Steve? Captain
Steve
America.
Steve Rogers is Captain America's name, but Chris Evans, I think. Or is it Chris Evans?
Oh, Chris. Yes. So Chris Evans, in the United States, means Captain America. Steve Rogers. However, I think Chris Evans, if you were to do a Google search from the UK, google.co.uk, is some sort of like late night comedian talk show host. Um, Chris Evans, yeah, something like that. Um, so we kind of already explored that earlier. You know, we're gonna have different top results for different non-unique phrases. But what if we just like completely blow that up in the sense of like, what if we just allow people to, in the same way they surf the internet and go to different websites, what if you could surf this web of trust space to see what the cultural context for people in Britain are, what the cultural context for my mom is, for what people in China are. And now suddenly, you might start to see that, correct, there is objective truth in some areas, but a lot of truth is culturally contextual because humans care about other humans. Um, it seems like more than they care about math or algorithms. They care about ego more than they care about equations. And so there is a lot of objective truth in the world. Equations, lines, um, the old lady and the hag. We all debate, well, what is the objective truth? But the only objective truth there is the vector lines. And those vector lines don't have meaning in and of themselves. So the objective truth that we really want to look at is the cultural context that leads to the bias of how we see the world. And this triple layer system not only is a way to help create a herd immunity of understanding the search results from protecting against very civil attack and other things, but it's also an engine to be able to explore cultural context. If we're just willing enough, like we dive into Wikipedia of a link of a link of a link, or a YouTube video, dark hole into a YouTube video to a YouTube video, YouTube video. What if you could do that exact same thing, but putting yourself in a different person's shoes or a different culture's shoes? And I know I'm ending with this type of poetry, but I just spent the whole last hour and a half explaining how we can algorithmically achieve that. And that's why I'm so excited about going that direction and building this out, because it enables our ability to think, learn, and explore rather than making the decisions for us, but also really, really, really helping us along the way in being able to have confidence score on whether Elon Musk 99.9% score is Elon Musk versus John Smith is 80% score as the global John Smith, but my local search result rank or my contextual search result rank is still going to show local John Smith above the global one. And then if there's any question, I can explore why there's a difference in those. And I can actually see that knowledge graph shapeshift in front of my eyes as I see things from different cultures.
Okay, cool. I guess we can end it on that. Are there any advertisements that you'd like to do before we go?
Um, if you want to help work on all the tiny problems to get up to that point, like making sure we can scale past 100,000 concurrent users without um, WebRTC falling over or crashing, bunch of really ridiculously boring baby steps that are just fixing things, even like DOM performance in the browser and trying to render stuff in React. Like all those are part of the pieces that move towards this end goal that I'm going towards. And I have to work on day by day, hour by hour. But then I get excited when I can talk about the reason why, which is what the last hour and a half was. So go to chat.gun.eco to jump into my community and see if you like the people there, see if you like me, and then either build your own cool projects with the technology we've already built, or decide, hey, I want to help Mark on fixing that particular Rust bug or that particular JavaScript DOM bug. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. And thanks, Jackson, for interviewing.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See ya.